Hi, this is Jason Nickleby, Coordinator of Officials with the Minnesota State High School League, and this is Basketball Officiating Training Tape number 8. This is our final tape. I want to thank all of you for tuning into these tapes and discussing plays and mechanics in this most challenging year. So really proud of our officials and the work that you've done. Let's finish strong, stay the course, and stay healthy and safe. Remember, we're not picking on any one crew or official or team, just trying to get better with these plays as we work through the season, and let's finish strong in the last few weeks of the regular season as we head into the postseason. With that, let's look at some plays. On this play, let's talk about screening mechanics, what we're looking for, and our coverage of the floor for screening. Screening is really a tough play to officiate when it's on ball, just because there's so much going on. You have the ball handler, their primary defender, you have the screener and their defender, and perhaps other players in on that as well. So if you take a look at this play, we have some screening action at the top of the screen, and this is a two official officiated play. So we should have two officials looking at this, the center and trail. The primary coverage official will take the ball handler and their primary defender, and then the off official would take the screening action. And if you take a look at the screening action at the top here, it is close to being illegal. I would understand if it was called. And remember, if we have a blind screen, they have to give them a step or an opportunity, to see that screen and go around it. So they need to provide that space. If they can see the screen coming, they just need to make sure they get to that spot and are not, moving into the player being screened if they can see the screen coming. And then the second screen to look at is the one that's ultimately called by the center here at the block. So we're officiating our primary area. So this is really good that we have our vision on this screen. It does appear that the screener leans into the defensive player. So this would be illegal action, and it's properly called as an illegal screen by the center who's officiating his primary properly. And then remember, let's work on our spot mechanics. Make sure that we indicate what we have, throw in, if we're going to have free throws, not in this case. Remember, it's a team control foul. And then give the same mechanics and communication at the table. So great job of officiating our primary coverage area. Good job of picking this up. Just remember to slow down, provide the spot mechanics, and then do the same as you report to the table. On this play, we're going to talk about transition coverage and a little bit about verticality principles and how we would handle this kind of play in our game. So first, we have a throw-in here in the backcourt. We don't have pressure. There's one defensive player back there. So center, we should be able to release. We don't need to hang out here. We should get down court a little faster than this to be in position for what ultimately is a tough play at the basket. So we need to get down a little bit quicker and get in position since there's no backcourt pressure with 4 players or more. If we have that, then yes, center should stick back. Otherwise, let's just go ahead and get down to our position, because in this particular play, the ball handler takes it right to the basket, and we have a potential collision contact to rule on at the block. So let's take a look at this play. She gets by the primary defender and encounters a secondary defender. So remember, if we have a secondary defender, possible block charge play, restricted area, and it's in the paint, this should be leads primary. Now in this case, the secondary defender gets all the way out of the lane. Therefore, responsibility for ruling on this contact really should be with the center. However, if we're not in position, our initial position at the free throw line extended or so, it's going to be very difficult to rule on this play and get any sort of accuracy on it. So we need the lead to get involved in this particular play. And we have to decide, does the defender establish legal guarding position? And if so, does she maintain it legally by moving obliquely, backwards, rising vertically? And in this particular case, that's the judgment that the lead is going to have to make, because the center is not quite there, even though the secondary defender does make it out of the paint. So therefore, it should be in the center's primary. But in this particular case, the lead would have to rule on this particular play. And I'm good with a no call on this. I think she establishes legal guarding position and maintains it legally. And you'll see that in the replay. But just a couple things to think about transition coverage. If there's no pressure, we should move up to our spot in the front court. If there's more than four players or more, then we should stick back and help the trail. And then just remember who has what as it relates to secondary defenders, and who has primary coverage on that type of play. On this play, let's talk about primary coverage area and post displacement. And post displacement is an area in basketball officiating that we tend to struggle with. We let them get away with probably a little more than we really should, in the name of having, some flow, not constantly interrupting the game with whistles. But when there's pretty good displacement, we got to make sure we pick those up, because it always escalates into something bigger, more physical as the game goes. And we really don't want to be putting air in the whistle with 30 seconds to play in a close game, and that's the first time that we're going to call post displacement. Doesn't mean pick it up in the very first possession of the game, but if it's significant displacement, then we need to pick it up whenever that happens to be. So let's take a look at this particular play. You'll see the post player from the offense come from the block area nearest the bench to the other block area, and the defender ultimately gains advantageous position, and the offensive player shoves her to the back and in the back and clearly displaces her, as she's coming across the paint. So this would be one that we would want called. We want to make sure that we get significant displacement, like this one. And from a primary coverage perspective, this action starts in the center's primary and then ultimately ends up in the lead's primary. So center, once this action starts going away from you, you can defer or give it to the lead at that point, and the lead really should be the primary on this based on where the contact takes place. However, centers, if the play or the matchup works away from you and there's no one between you and that matchup, you can continue with it. But otherwise, you need to stick with players in your primary coverage area and defer to the lead. But we would want the lead to get this particular foul, as the defender is behind her, but then ultimately gains advantageous position and is shoved in the back. And this obviously would be a very big advantage gained if they ultimately dump the ball into her in the paint. She's going to have an easy layup because the defender that was guarding her just got pushed to the ground. So make sure we get these big ones. We don't need to get every little ticky-tack one, but when we have a shove to the ground, we want to make sure we get that, and primary covering official should really be the one to have the whistle on a play like this. On this one, let's talk about last second shot mechanics, who's doing what, our communication, who's handling these kinds of things, and then just addressing unusual situations in our mechanics. And this is a play that we need to discuss in advance in our pregame, how we're going to handle it, because when a play like this one occurs, and if we don't discuss it, we're going to run into issues on who has last second shot, who has potential contact at the basket, when a play like this one occurs. So want to make sure we really discuss these and hammer out the details so we don't end up with egg on our face as the crew because we didn't discuss this kind of situation and what we were going to do with it. So you'll see here that we have a front court throw-in. It's ultimately intercepted near the basket, and we're going to head the other way in transition with a turnover. And you can't really see the clock. It's about 7 or 8 seconds or so, which means it's going to be really near the expiration of the first half, and we just need to be ready for a variety of scenarios. So let's talk about what our typical coverage is for last second shot and how it leads into an unusual situation like this one. So you see that we have a front court throw-in, probably had the ball head out of bounds, foul, something like that, leading up to this play. So if that was the case, we typically would say that the C opposite the table would have last second shot. We'd lock them in with 25, 30 seconds, give or take, to go on the clock. The lead can go back and forth between table side and opposite table. And if we go back in transition, then the lead just fills on the table side. And then the trail, who would remain on table side, and could be in center type or center like position, but would remain on table side, will just come down as the lead if we have a turnover like we have here. And then the C opposite would remain in the center position and would retain last second shot responsibility. So that's typically what we would do in a situation like this. But a wrinkle in this play is we ultimately had a ball go out of bounds or a foul or similar. So the C opposite now is becoming the trail opposite. And what we would recommend on this play is, even though the administering official is the trail on the throw-in, we would recommend that the administering official administer the free throw or the throw-in rather, and then would be still the center, even though the lead is on that side of the court. So to put it in maybe simpler terms, the lead, even though they're opposite table, they are still going to fill if we go back the other direction, because that administering official on the throw-in is still the center, even though she's administering a throw-in as a typical trail. And the reason we would want you to do this is that if you have a turnover like we have here, we know that administering official who has the throw-in is going to be the C opposite no matter what, which means now when we go back in transition, that official will remain the center opposite, which means that official will also have last second shot responsibility throughout this play. And that means that the trail, who is still in front of the table, even though they're not administering the throw-in, will be the new lead coming down in transition, which means that official will be responsible for contact at the basket, and the center opposite will be responsible for the last second shot. You see in this particular case that that's not what happens. Ultimately, they go back to typical positioning and coverage, where the trail or the administering official on the throw-in becomes the trail, even though that official was probably C opposite prior to the throw-in. And now when we go in transition, now that official comes down to become the new lead, which is what we would do throughout the game, with the exception of last second shot mechanics when we're trying to lock down. We need to keep that C opposite if we can, because it really leads to issues when we have a turnover and transition like this play. So we see that the trail stays the trail. We have a turnover. Now that official becomes the new lead, which means the person responsible for the last second shot is now the new trail, who was the lead, and they're about at half court when the shot takes place, and that's just not what we want. Coverage-wise, it's not efficient, and our accuracy goes way down when we have to come from that far away to take that call. So to summarize, recommending that the C opposite take last second shot. Lead can go back and forth and fill if we go in transition the other way. And even if we have a throw-in, that official that's C opposite should stay C opposite. Even though the lead is on their side, they would just fill if we go back and transition on a play like this one. That will lead to cleaner coverage and better accuracy as it relates to last second shot coverage. On this play, let's talk about our primary coverage areas and offensive initiated contact and what we're looking for on plays such as this. So first, let's start with our primary coverage. And you see that the ball handler is on the other side of the lane line extended from the trail. It is now in the center's primary coverage area. And so you see the center pick up the count, which means that the center has picked up this primary matchup. And as such, the trail should then be picking up any of the backside action and should not be concentrating on the ball handler or the defender that's on ball until they get into their primary coverage area. We should be sticking with our primary coverage matchups. And so you'll see in this particular case that the center picks it up, has a count, moves towards the basket. There's some slight contact from the offensive player, and an offensive foul, player control foul, is called by the trail. And this is an incorrect call. This is not one we would want called. When we're looking at plays such as this with offensive initiated contact, we're looking for really an overt act, an obvious displacement. And really, when you do that, we're looking for an extension of the arm almost. And in this particular case, the elbow is bent and it really never gets even close to straight, which would indicate displacement. And so this is a play we want to stay off of. And I think our accuracy diminishes when we officiate outside of our primary coverage area. And as a trail, this is just too far. We need to trust the center, let the center take this play. It's still in their primary coverage area, and it was from the beginning. And so any call or no call should come from the center on this play. They have a great vantage point on contact, who's initiating it, whether there's displacement or not. And for trail, this is a long ways to go, and I think our accuracy diminishes when we go this far. So make sure we stick in our primary coverage area. Make sure we trust our partners to officiate their area to the best of their ability. And then when we're looking from a legal contact perspective by offensive players, make sure that there is clear separation gained by an overt act, an extension of the arm, shoulder dip, etc. That's what we're looking for, and if that occurs, we want to make sure we get those. But in this particular case, not enough, and if we defer to the center, I think we will accurately no call this on our next opportunity. On this play, let's talk about screening mechanics and coverage like we had on one of the previous plays. So you see we have a ball screen at the top of the key. It's in the trail's primary coverage area, but remember, when we have screening situations like this, we would like to have two sets of eyes on the screening action and the ball handler and their primary defender to make sure that we pick up what we need to pick up, because again, this matchup, the screening and the subsequent contact can be very difficult to officiate with one official. So if we can get two sets of eyes on screening like this on ball, that would be very helpful. So trail, it's in the primary coverage of the trail. We have the count. You see the offensive player come up from behind to set an initial screen. It's a blind screen, but ultimately there really isn't contact off of that initial screening action, and so the initial screen is fine. But as you see that the screener rolls to the basket, and we're starting to see this more and more in offenses, that they are screening and then they will roll and subsequently clear out the defensive player as they go to the basket, and it typically happens closer to the basket as they go down the paint, and they may clear that defensive player out down the paint. But in this particular case, she rolls, and as she rolls to the basket, it appears that the screener gives the defender a flipper, maybe not quite in the neck, but close to the head and neck area, gives her a flip and displaces her and rolls to the basket. And this would be an illegal screen that we would want called. And again, very difficult for one official to pick this up. So what we would suggest on a play like this is we get two sets of eyes on the screening action, ball handler, primary matchup, and when the ball handler goes by the screen, that's when the trail should hand off responsibility of the ball handler to the center, and then shift our vision to the screener and the defender that's on that screener, and we might be able to pick this up. Because if we expect trail to pick up all of this, or center to pick up all of this, going to be a very difficult play to officiate, and it still is very difficult. But so our suggestion would be two sets of eyes on this. When she gets by that screener, the trail's vision should transition to the screening action, and the center should transition to ball handler and take that matchup from there. But very difficult play to officiate. We would want an illegal screen called on this play, and it would be a better shot of getting this correct if we have two sets of eyes and then we transition coverage accordingly. On this one, let's talk screening principles, primary coverage, and offensive initiated contact. Pretty similar to the play that we saw earlier. And I want to reiterate a couple things we've already discussed. One, when we have screening, two sets of eyes on the screening action and the ball handler and their primary defender will make this play easier to officiate. So I believe that we're doing that. We have two sets of eyes on this. And then remember, when that ball handler gets by the screener, and now we have a primary on-ball defender, this is now center's primary as it's going away from the screener. So this would be center's primary on this play to officiate, because now we're looking through screeners and other players to officiate this play properly. So we want to make sure that center takes this play. And then secondly, when we're officiating plays outside of our primary coverage area and they're going away from us, our accuracy diminishes, and we need to make sure there is an overt act, clear separation, shoulder dip, arm straightens with displacement before we call this type of foul. This is not a foul we want called. Just like the last one, we want to make sure that these are clear and obvious fouls where they clear that defensive player out of their established position that they have obtained legally, and that contact is initiated by the offensive player. So again, two sets of eyes on this play. Once it gets past the screener, defer to the center to take this play, and we're looking for an overt act, clear displacement with the arm, shoulder, etc., not just simply feeling out and touching for the defensive player. On this play, I want to talk about held ball mechanics and how we handle these kinds of situations. And we typically don't talk about held balls very often. They seem pretty straightforward, but sometimes those kinds of plays can get us in trouble if we're not in the proper position and we don't have a physical presence and use our voice and our physical presence to really reduce the issues that we see. So I like where the center is on this play, nice and low, has a good vantage point of the rebounding action. The lead closes on the action as well, and we have a good physical presence at the end of the play, which really helps us to avoid issues like a punch or a push or trash talking and the like, because we have a physical presence. Very, very unlikely for them to do that when we're there. Now, I know with COVID, we're typically not having as much of a physical presence as we typically would, but in the future, we would want to have a physical presence just like is shown here. And then a second thing is make sure that when we have a held ball type situation that we don't anticipate a held ball, we don't anticipate a foul, we don't anticipate anything, and we have to make sure that There is simultaneous control of the basketball to have a held ball in a situation like this, because several times we blow the whistle thinking someone's going to get hurt or we just want to end the play, and only one player in fact has it. So we just need to slow ourselves down, make sure that there is in fact a held ball, and then we use good mechanics here. Stop the clock, open hand, have a physical presence, indicate a held ball. Now, if you just want to go with the held ball signal, that's fine, but I like this mechanic of open hand in the air. It slows ourselves down, allows us to process what we saw, indicate a held ball, clear the players, and then indicate the direction. So that mechanically, coverage-wise, very good. And then the other thing just to keep in mind is when we have held ball situations, make sure that players aren't tackling, jumping on, diving on players just in the name of getting the basketball. If that kind of contact occurs, that's a foul. Just because it's a loose ball does not allow a free-for-all or a golden ticket to just do whatever you want to get the ball. You need to get the ball legally. So if you're going to dive on a player, tackle, push, displace, etc., that's going to be grounds for a foul, and we should be calling those, and we tend to kind of let those go. So make sure that we don't allow players to do that. Make sure we get those. Don't anticipate, but when it's there with control or a foul, let's put air in the whistle and call that play correctly. So well done here by the crew. This is a good play to finish our training tape series on for the year, and just a good example of mechanics and what we're looking for in positioning and coverage of the front court. So you notice we're in transition. We hustle down, get into good initial position. We're mirroring the ball as the lead. Center works low beneath the matchup to view space, and we just really do a nice job of covering the front court the way we want it covered. We get to initial position by hustling, get to a position to view space, adjust our position as necessary to continue to see that space so we can properly rule on legal guarding position and verticality. So, and then mirroring the ball as the lead as well. So this is just excellent front court coverage, mechanics, positioning, and exactly how we want front court coverage to look by moving to improve, not just moving for the sake of moving. We're moving to get to a position to view space, to view contact and who's responsible and all those kinds of pieces. So very nicely done in this play by the crew. Excellent coverage and mechanics and positioning. And just want to commend all of the crews this year for your hard work, sacrifice to give the kids a chance to play. So great job in your work and in your study of the rules and mechanics and philosophies. So that's the final play for this year. Appreciate everyone's work. Stay safe and healthy, and we look forward to a full basketball season in 2021-2022.